Lieutenant George Gay was struggling to survive in the frigid Pacific waters, surrounded by the wreckage of 15 American torpedo bombers. He was the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, but just hours later, this seemingly hopeless moment would become the catalyst for one of the most dramatic reversals in human history. On June 4, 1942, a battle that seemed destined for failure completely changed the course of World War II. In just 5 minutes, the real secrets of this battle run far deeper than what meets the eye. It wasn't just a clash of military might. It was the ultimate showdown of intelligence, courage, and destiny. In this seemingly impossible victory, how did America turn the tables from the brink of defeat? And how did Japan go from having victory in their grasp to catastrophic failure? The Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941, saw the Imperial Japanese Navy destroy the main force of the U.S. Pacific Fleet in just 2 hours. But this assault had one fatal flaw. 3 American aircraft carriers happened to be absent from the harbor. The Enterprise was delivering aircraft to Wake Island, the Lexington was on a mission near Midway, and the Saratoga was undergoing repairs on the West Coast. The Japanese quickly realized this problem. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto knew full well that, as long as these carriers existed, Japan could never truly control the Pacific. Even more troubling was America's possession of the world's most powerful industrial capacity. If given time to rebuild their fleet, the Americans would become an unbeatable enemy. Time was everything for Japan. They had to completely destroy American naval power before the U.S. could fully mobilize. But what happened next would shock everyone. In a secret underground facility at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, a group of American codebreakers was conducting work that could determine the outcome of the war. This intelligence station, codenamed Hypo, was led by Navy Commander Joseph Rochefort. Their mission was to crack Japanese naval codes. In March 1942, Rochefort's team began frequently intercepting Japanese naval communications, mentioning the mysterious designation AF. Through analyzing various clues, they suspected AF might be Midway, but suspicion wasn't enough. They needed concrete evidence to convince the higher dash-ups. Rochefort devised a brilliant scheme. He had the Midway base send an unencrypted message claiming their water desalination equipment had malfunctioned, and they were running low on fresh water. Sure enough, 2 days later, they intercepted a Japanese naval intelligence report stating, AF area short of fresh water. This simple yet ingenious trick confirmed the Japanese attack target, but this was just the beginning. The information they decoded next would give the Americans an unprecedented strategic advantage. The USS Yorktown had been severely damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea. The Japanese believed this carrier was completely out of action and would need months to repair. This assessment would become one of their most fatal errors. The workers at Pearl Harbor Navy Yard created a miracle of engineering history. In just 72 hours, they were literally racing against time to repair the Yorktown's battle damage. Welders worked around the clock, continuing their work on deck even after the carrier put to sea. Even more remarkable was that the Yorktown's air group was essentially rebuilt from scratch. The pilots came from different squadrons. Many had never trained together, but they were all survivors of the Coral Sea battle with invaluable combat experience. This risen from the dead carrier would play a decisive role in the coming battle. But the Japanese knew nothing about it. Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagamo, commander of the Japanese mobile force, was an experienced but overly cautious commander. On the morning of June 4th, as his fleet approached Midway, he faced a difficult choice. After the first wave of aircraft attacking Midway returned, the flight leader reported that a second attack was needed to completely destroy the island's defenses. At the same time, a scout plane reported spotting American ships, but their exact composition was unknown. Nagamo faced two options: immediately attack the American fleet with his available aircraft, but this meant returning aircraft might crash into the sea from fuel exhaustion, or first recover the returning aircraft, rearm and refuel them, then launch an attack. But this would give the Americans precious time. Nagamo chose the latter. The seemingly reasonable decision would become a catastrophic error an hour later. But Nagamo didn't know that American attack aircraft were already airborne. Searching for them. The first wave of American attacks was a complete disaster. 15 TBD torpedo bombers from the Hornet, without fighter escort, bravely charged toward the Japanese carrier formation. These obsolete torpedo planes were slow and had to fly low and straight to launch their torpedoes, making them sitting ducks against Japanese Zero fighters. All 15 aircraft of Torpedo Squadron 8 were shot down. Of the 30 crew members, only George Gay survived. Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 14 suffered similarly, with only 4 of 14 aircraft returning. Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3 fared slightly better but still lost 10 planes. These brave airmen knew it was suicide, yet they still charged fearlessly toward the enemy. Their sacrifice seemed meaningless. Not a single torpedo hit its target. But they didn't know that these desperate attacks were creating the conditions for the coming victory. These low-level attacks forced Japanese Zero fighters to descend to intercept, and also prevented Nagamo from launching aircraft during the attacks. Most crucially, just as the torpedo planes were being massacred, American dive bombers were flying toward the Japanese fleet. At 10:20 a.m., for the Imperial Japanese Navy, the darkest 5 minutes in history began. Just as Japanese Zero fighters were slaughtering American torpedo planes at sea level, 17 dive bombers from the Yorktown appeared from the northeast, and 33 dive bombers from the Enterprise appeared from the southwest, almost simultaneously over the Japanese fleet. Even more incredible, the Enterprise dive bombers had originally lost their way and were preparing to return home. But Commander Wade McCluskey made a crucial decision to continue searching north. It was this seemingly random decision that led them to spot the Japanese destroyer Arashi returning to formation, and follow it to find the Japanese carrier group. When American dive bombers plunged down from 12,000 feet, the decks of Japanese carriers were packed with fully fueled and armed aircraft ready to take off and attack the American fleet. These planes were like time bombs waiting to be detonated. The Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, 3 main Japanese carriers were hit and burst into flames within 5 minutes. Those aircraft and bombs originally meant to attack the Americans now became weapons destroying their own ships. Chapter 7. The Hiryu, flagship of the 2nd Carrier Division, was the only surviving Japanese carrier that day. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi immediately organized a counterattack, sending 18 dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters to attack the American fleet. The Yorktown became the target of Japanese revenge. Despite desperate interception by American fighters, 3 bombs still hit the Yorktown. This carrier that had just risen from the Coral Sea battle once again faced life or death, but the Yorktown's damage control teams displayed amazing skill. In just 2 hours, they extinguished the fires, repaired the flight deck, and even restored the Yorktown to 25 knots. When the Japanese second wave arrived, pilots even thought this was another American carrier. However, this time the Yorktown couldn't escape fate. 2 torpedoes hit her port side, and massive explosions caused the carrier to list severely. Captain Elliot Buckmaster ordered abandon ship, and the Yorktown seemed to have reached the end of her life. But the story wasn't over. The Hiryu would pay for her victory. Chapter 8. Enterprise aircraft launched a revenge attack on the Hiryu. 24 dive bombers suddenly appeared through the clouds, delivering devastating bombing on the Hiryu. Rear Admiral Yamaguchi refused to leave the burning Hiryu. He sent his final message: "I will share the fate of the Hiryu." This commander, considered the finest carrier leader in the Japanese Navy, chose the samurai's destiny. By evening that day, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 4 main carriers and most of their trained pilots. These pilots were the elite of the Japanese Navy, and their loss was far more serious than the carriers themselves. Meanwhile, although the Americans lost the Yorktown, later sunk by a Japanese submarine, they saved the Enterprise and Hornet. More importantly, most American pilots were rescued and would become valuable assets in future battles. This day's loss comparison determined the final direction of the Pacific War. Victory at Midway was largely due to America's massive intelligence advantage. But this advantage went far beyond just breaking codes. The Americans not only knew the Japanese would attack Midway, they knew the exact timing, force composition, and even the names of Japanese commanders. This allowed the Americans to develop precise battle plans and wait for the enemy in the most advantageous positions. More importantly, the Americans had over 30 PBY seaplanes for reconnaissance, while the Japanese had only 7 scout planes. This huge gap in reconnaissance capability allowed the Americans to maintain battlefield initiative throughout. But the most crucial intelligence advantage was that the Americans knew the Japanese didn't know they knew. This information asymmetry allowed the Americans to create the perfect ambush. Victory in intelligence warfare laid the foundation for military victory. But what happened next would demonstrate the power of individual heroism. Official war histories rarely mention the heroic acts of ordinary soldiers. But it was these extraordinary acts of courage by ordinary people that ultimately decided the battle's outcome. Lieutenant Commander Richard Best, an Enterprise dive bomber pilot, personally sank 2 Japanese carriers, the Akagi and Hiryu, during those crucial 5 minutes. This record remains unbroken to this day. Ensign John Baldwin risked his life returning to the burning hangar bay of the Yorktown to rescue trapped pilots. His heroic action saved dozens of lives. Then there were the pilots struggling in the water. PBY seaplane crews risked attacks from Japanese fighters to land on the ocean surface for rescues. Many American pilots survived only because of these rescues. These individual acts of heroism converged into the tide of history. But the significance of this victory went far beyond the military level. The Battle of Midway wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological turning point. For Americans, this was their first real victory since Pearl Harbor, greatly boosting national morale. For Japan, the shock of this defeat was devastating. The myths of divine wind and Bushido spirit were shattered for the first time. Japanese people began to doubt their chances of winning the war. More seriously, Japanese media completely suppressed news of this defeat, causing serious misjudgment of the war situation at home. Strategically, the Battle of Midway ended Japanese expansion in the Pacific, forcing them into defense. In subsequent warfare, Japan never again had the capability to launch large-scale offensive operations. But the real turning significance of this battle was proving that technology and industrial strength would ultimately determine victory in modern warfare. America began to fully utilize its industrial advantages, while Japan fell into resource depletion. The Battle of Midway also demonstrated the importance of technological innovation in warfare. The American SBD dive bomber, while not the most advanced aircraft, played a decisive role at the crucial moment with its stability and accuracy. The Japanese Zero fighter, which they were so proud of, had advantages in maneuverability, but its fatal weakness of lacking armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks was also exposed. Many Zeros exploded from a single bullet hit, which became a nightmare for the Japanese in later battles. The application of radar technology also began showing its value. Although radar wasn't advanced enough at the time, it could already provide valuable early warning time for defenders. This technological advantage would become increasingly important in subsequent battles. Advances in communication technology were equally crucial. Americans could achieve effective coordination between units, while Japanese communication systems were relatively backward, exposing serious problems in complex carrier operations. The contest of technology reflected the different industrial capabilities and research levels of the two nations. Looking back at the Battle of Midway, we find many seemingly chance factors actually determined the battle's outcome. If the Yorktown hadn't been repaired in time, if Enterprise pilots hadn't followed the Japanese destroyer, if Nagamo had chosen immediate attack instead of rearming, history might have been completely different. But behind these chances lay deep inevitability. American advantages in intelligence, industry, and technology created conditions for these chances to occur. Japanese strategic misjudgments and tactical execution problems amplified the impact of these chance factors. Most crucially, the courage and professionalism Americans displayed at key moments turned possibility into reality. Those torpedo plane pilots who charged to their deaths, the dive bomber pilots who bombed with precision, and all personnel providing support in the rear. Their performance determined the battle's final outcome. Fortune favors the prepared. The Battle of Midway is the best interpretation of this saying, behind victory always lies enormous cost. Americans lost 150 pilots and crew members in the Battle of Midway. These young men were mostly in their early 20s, their lives forever frozen on the Pacific Ocean surface. For Japan, the losses were even more devastating. Besides 4 carriers, Japan lost 322 trained pilots. These pilots were all elites trained over many years, and their loss was irreplaceable for the Japanese Navy. The deeper cost lay in changing concepts of warfare. After the Battle of Midway, war was no longer about courage and spirit, but about industrial strength and technological capability. This change caused tremendous impact on traditional military thinking. For survivors, the psychological trauma from this battle was equally enormous. Many pilots suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for years after the war. Their pain rarely understood by the public. The glory of victory often masks war's cruel nature. But these costs should not be forgotten. Chapter 15. After the Battle of Midway, the nature of the Pacific War fundamentally changed. From then on, America began controlling the war's initiative, while Japan was forced into a defensive position. More importantly, this battle proved the decisive role of aircraft carriers in modern naval warfare. The traditional battleship era completely ended, with aircraft carriers becoming the core of naval power. This understanding would influence naval construction worldwide until today. Strategically, the Battle of Midway laid the foundation for subsequent American offensives. In the Pacific, Guadalcanal, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, every battle could be traced back to the victory at Midway. But this battle's significance wasn't limited to the military level. It proved to the world that even facing enormous disadvantages, with correct strategy, adequate preparation, and unyielding courage, the weak could defeat the strong. This lesson still has practical significance today. When we face challenges, the story of the Battle of Midway reminds us that victory often belongs to those who are best prepared and most determined. 75 years have passed, and the story of the Battle of Midway still shocks everyone who hears it. Those 5 minutes changed the course of world history, but more importantly, it demonstrated the enormous potential humans can unleash when facing desperate situations. This battle tells us that the value of intelligence, the power of technology, team collaboration, and individual courage, when these factors combine, they can create miracles. But at the core remains the human factor. Those ordinary people willing to sacrifice everything for a just cause. When we look back at history, we see not just war and death, but the brilliance of human spirit. Those brave pilots in the Battle of Midway, their spiritual legacy is more precious than any military victory. In today's challenging world, the story of Midway reminds us that no matter how difficult the situation we face, as long as we maintain wisdom, courage, and unity, there are no obstacles we cannot overcome. This is perhaps why this battle from 75 years ago is still worth reflecting on repeatedly. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The spirit of the Battle of Midway will forever inspire future generations to face challenges and create miracles.